Okay, so the next principle, non-interference. I unapologetically stole the catchphrase "leave yourself alone" from a teacher of mine because I don't think you could put this principle more kind of elegantly or succinctly um, as a practice instruction, if we could only do it. And at first look, it appears that non-interference would stand in direct opposition to the first principle of engagement that I laid out. And that's very intentional because the polarity of how much agency, how much surrender, how much effort, and how much acceptance, how much to push, how much to relax, is probably not resolved until real high reaches of development. That's my sense. And so for now, we're left to tussle with that. There's somewhere from some tradition somewhere, there's the koan of perfect as you are with much room for improvement. And that's the point of presenting these two first principles as a kind of crucible of polarity practice. And Ken Wilber, one way he summarized the evolutionary process was also elegant in just a few words: transcend and include. And so transcend would be related to engagement in the sense of practicing to break frames, say, to push the limits of our current self-image, to enlarge it and expand it into something bigger or better than we currently are. And then the include, according to Wilber, is that as we grow, the other kind of half of the project is to integrate, to embrace, and to unify all the lower stages of development, all our lower frames, into this larger whole. That's more the non-interference. So interference in the context of psychotherapy is an effort to be a better version of yourself, but largely from old self-images and old tapes. So there's nothing wrong with being quite ambitious about engaging and wanting to be a better version of yourself. But if you're not including and embracing lower versions of yourself, you're likely not just transcending, you're dissociating and pushing painful, less developed frames out of consciousness, which is going to keep pulling down on growth, not allowing a more unified version of yourself to emerge. So I'm using the term non-interference so far as a way to, hopefully in the least interfering way, explain inclusion, explain embrace, and total non-interference may be quite a high bar of understanding for us, or a high insight, say. But that's not really the point. The point of practicing non-interference is that if we find a way to practice the principle, we are doing what we all can do, which is at least reduce interference. Okay, so included in pure non-interference in a psychotherapeutic setting would include subtle doing, say, such as empathizing or understanding or caring, or even some forms of compassion. Okay? And we can note that all of those subtle forms of practicing non-interference are actually a kind of love. But the love that is approaching non-interference would have to include everything without any exception. And so looking at that from a point of view of psychotherapy, loving everything without exception is the kind of bar we would be shooting for. Any other kind of love would be a frame, and that would be further worth investigating. So one major advantage of actually practicing non-interference in psychotherapy is that it will quickly reveal how much we're actually interfering. It further uncovers our frames. There's likely a background tape of constant evaluation, constant judgment, constant assessment of what's going on, constant comparing of how well you're doing or how good this moment is compared to the last one, something like that. And this structure, which modern parlance has called the inner critic, and in psychoanalytic terms, Freud called the superego, is a major obstacle worth digging up, confronting, and working with in order to make further progress on the developmental journey. So here's the bad news, say, about the superego. And I promise some good news later. The bad news is if the ego, as I've talked about it, is the part of you that's constantly seeking homeostasis, comfort, doesn't want to grow, doesn't want to budge. And let's just call that whole thing for now a frame. Then the superego is like super glue on the frame. It actually solidifies the sense of the centrality of ego even more by compressing it. And you'll notice that the superego actually attacks you in the areas that you already believe are most true about you. So an already kind of solidified ego is then glued into place by this kind of critical voice. And ultimately, that critical voice or that structure is a defense mechanism from actually getting to deeper layers of the onion in the ego itself. But I did promise you some good news about the ultimate structure of the superego, so I don't want to overlook that. So imagine you'd done the good hard work of digging up the superego, getting some distance from it, disidentifying it, challenging it enough, reclaiming some kind of power and agency, um, so that it's not just running the show all the time or not just always in the background. Imagine if you could grow that part of you that's always commenting on your experience. Imagine if that structure were more like conscience or a wise version of yourself, that you could train that structure to work for you rather than against you, so that you could be a more caring, more developed version of yourself. And more than anything else, that part could help you become a deliberately developmental practitioner. It's quite in reach. So the final thing I wanted to cover on this topic of non-interference would be in the realm of how else you could practice it. So why is mindfulness practice so powerful in terms of making psychotherapy a deliberately developmental practice and a practice of non-interference? I want to just say this with the caveat that the original intention in mindfulness practice was not healing so much as it's not to heal the ego, it's to completely dismantle it, actually breaking all frames, so to speak. And I don't want to be on the record for saying that I think mindfulness practices should be used as therapy. But that said, it does seem to have an impact in three ways that I can see. The first is the beginning instructions in most mindfulness practices help concentration, and then they also help some kind of relaxation or what could be called calm abiding. So notice that the polarity of engagement and non-interference is being set up right away. I think that's useful. Secondly, mindfulness puts into practice both the capacity to investigate aspects of your experience as well as to step back from aspects of your experience. And the stepping back would be closer to non-interference. And when we step back and hold a frame of not interfering with what's coming up in our experience, what tends to happen is that painful and old suppressed material tends to get unlocked and to come up into awareness. And that's helpful in a psychotherapeutic context because if appropriate, you can then bring that material into a more healing context. And then finally, and I think most importantly, mindfulness practice over time has a kind of hidden effect of I think being a perfect template for which to hold other developmental practices too. So in other words, first of all, it's challenging, right? Meditating daily is a long-term commitment, and it's not easy. There's no quick fixes in there. So it gets us used to slow, steady, consistent progress rather than the quick fixes that we can be easily seduced by in today's day and age. The other thing is it develops patience. It develops a kind of humility because it's difficult, and it keeps us honest with ourselves.